$10. That's what it came down to, one soft, folded $10 bill that had been in and out of that man's pocket so many times it had gone the color of dishwater. He could have bought food with it. He could have bought 2 nights in the Ridgeway Motel, or gas enough to leave this county forever and never look back. Instead, he laid it flat on the auction table, smoothed the crease out with his thumb like it deserved dignity, and bet the whole thing on a ranch that everybody in 3 towns swore was worth nothing but rot and regret. They laughed at him. I laughed too, God forgive me, I laughed. Because nobody bids on the Bellamy place. Not for $10, not for 10 cents. 22 years that house had sat out on the flat with its windows dark, and the story we all told about it was the kind of story you tell to keep children off the porch and grown men from asking questions. But that cowboy walked up there anyway. Walked right up to a door nobody'd opened in 2 decades. And what he found on the other side of it. Well, I've had a long time to think about how to say this part, and I still can't do it justice. So let me just start where it started, and you can decide for yourself whether a man like that was a fool, or whether the rest of us were. The wind was doing that thing it does out here in late October, coming down off the ridge in long dry breaths that carry the smell of nothing. No rain in it, no grass, just dust and the memory of dust. And I remember thinking that was a poor kind of weather to gamble a life on. I'm getting ahead of myself. That's a habit. My late husband used to say I told stories the way a dog runs a fence line, back and forth, never quite getting to the gate. So let me put myself in it plain. My name is Delamero, I'm 68 years old, and for 31 of those years I kept the ledger at the Cattlemen's Exchange in Ridgeway County, which is a fancy way of saying I sat at a card table with a tin cash box and wrote down who owed what to whom. I write everything down, always have. There's a little green tally book in my apron pocket right now, and if you shook me out at my funeral you'd find one there too. Some people pray. I keep accounts. It comes to about the same thing. I've found a way of insisting the world adds up even when it plainly doesn't. So it was me sitting at that card table the morning they auctioned off the county's dead land. Understand, this wasn't a real auction. Real auctions have a man in a bolo tie who talks fast and rings a little bell. This was the tax office clearing its books, parcels the county had seized for back taxes and couldn't give away, offered up on the courthouse steps to whoever'd take them off the rolls. Half of it was ditch land. A quarter of it was underwater when the creek ran high. And the rest was the Bellamy place. 340 acres of hardpan with a 2-story house on it that the county assessor had marked in his own tidy hand, condemned, do not enter. Nobody came. That was the shameful part if you want to know. 6 parcels of land that men had died over, literally died in the old range days, over water rights and fence lines. And the crowd that showed up to claim them was me, the assessor, Deputy Hollies picking his teeth, an old prude from the feed store hopping to snag the ditch acreage cheap for grazing. And then the cowboy. I didn't know his name yet. I'd never seen him. He came up the courthouse walk against that dry wind with his hat pulled low and his coat too thin for the season, and he had the particular walk of a man who's been on his feet a long time and doesn't intend to stop, a walk that's more falling forward and catching yourself than it is stepping. Lean. Weathered in a way that didn't match his age, I'd have put him at 40, but his hands, when I saw them later, were older than that, cracked at the knuckles, one thumbnail black and healing. He carried a single canvas duffel and nothing else. No truck that I could see. No horse. A man arriving at the end of something. He stood at the back while the assessor read the parcels out in his bored churchyard voice, and he didn't so much as shift until the man got to the Bellamy place. Parcel 6, the assessor said, and I watched him say it the way you'd watch a fellow reach into a hornet's nest, careful, quick, wanting it over. 340 acres, the old Bellamy homestead. House on the property is condemned. County makes no representation as to condition. Opening's $10 for the tax lien, and I'll tell you honest, folks, I'd be tickled if somebody just took it. Nobody moved. Prout actually laughed, a short bark, and said something to Hollies about how you couldn't pay him to sleep out there. That's when the cowboy walked up. He didn't say a word at first. He came to my card table, because I was the one holding the tin box, I was the money, and he reached into his coat and brought out that $10 bill, and Lord, I wish you could have seen the state of it. It had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had gone furry. There was a rust-colored stain in one corner. It was, I understood immediately and without being told, the last money that man had in this world. You get so you can read a bill like a face after 31 years. This one said empty everywhere, but the number printed on it. He laid it on the table. He smoothed the middle crease down flat with the pad of his thumb, slow, twice, like he was saying goodbye to it, or maybe apologizing. "Parcel 6, he said. His voice was quiet and worn soft at the edges, a low country voice, southern gone dusty. "The Bellamy place. I'll take it." I remember Prout's laugh dying in his throat. I remember the assessor blinking at him like he'd asked to buy the moon. "Son," the assessor said, "you understand that house can't be lived in. It's condemned. Roof's likely gone. Could be the whole thing's a rat's nest." "I understand," the cowboy said. 300 acres of hardpan won't graze a goat without water, and the well's been dry since." "I understand," he said again, not sharp, just tired the way stone is tired. "And here's the part I've turned over in my mind 1,000 times since. The part that first told me this was a different sort of man than the sort we generally got. The assessor, who was not a cruel person, only a bored one, looked at that furry $10 bill and looked at that thin coat and did a kind thing badly. He said, "Mister, keep your money. I'll deed it to you for $1 and you'll still be overpaying. Buy yourself a meal with the rest." And the cowboy, I watched his jaw work, watched some private muscle in his face tighten. The cowboy said, "No, sir. 10's the price you called. I'll pay the price you called." I didn't understand it then. I thought it was pride, and I thought pride was a stupid thing to feed when your belly was empty. It took me a long while to understand it wasn't pride at all. It was the opposite of pride. It was a man who had lost so much, so completely, that the only thing he had left to hold on to was the idea that he could still meet a price honestly, that if the world named a cost, he could still be the kind of man who paid it in full. Charity would have taken that from him. So he refused it, and it cost him $9 he couldn't spare, and he paid it like it was nothing, and it was everything. I took the bill. My hand wasn't quite steady. I wrote it in the ledger in my careful hand, Parcel 6, Bellamy Homestead, $10, paid in full. And then, because I do it out of 31 years of habit and can't help myself, I wrote his name at the top of the line when he gave it. Cole Hardy. He signed the deed transfer with a stub of pencil he took from his own pocket, and I noticed his hand was steadier than mine, and I noticed something else. When he wrote his name, he wrote it small in the very corner of the line, the way a man writes who has learned to take up as little room in the world as he's able. Some grief teaches you to be big and loud. Some teaches you to disappear. His had taught him the second thing. "You need a ride out there?" Deputy Hollies asked him, and I'll give Hollies credit, there was real concern under the toothpick. "It's 11 miles. Ain't nothing between here and there." "I'll walk," Cole said. "It's coming on cold. I've walked in cold." And he picked up his duffel, and he touched the brim of his hat to me. To me, the old woman with the cash box, like I was somebody worth the courtesy. And he turned and walked back down the courthouse steps into that dry wind and started up the county road toward the Bellamy place on foot. Now, I have to tell you about the ranch, about the story we told, because you can't understand what I did next following him, which was not like me. I am not a following sort of woman, unless you understand what that empty house meant to people around here. The Bellamys had been somebody once. Old Amos Bellamy ran cattle on that flat back before the war, and he did well at it, well enough to build the biggest house in the county, two full stories, a wraparound porch, real glass in every window, which was showing off in a place where most folks made do with oilcloth. His son took it over. That was Silas Bellamy, and I knew Silas a little in the years before, a big quiet man with a beard gone iron gray. And Silas had a boy of his own, a bright reckless kid named Tom. And there was, I'll say it plainly, though it's not mine to say, there was a fire. 22 years back, a winter fire in the barn, and Tom Bellamy died in it. He was 19. He'd gone in after the horses. And Silas Bellamy, who had lost his wife to a fever years before and now lost his only son to the flames, Silas Bellamy shut the door of that big house and did not come out. That's the story. Folks brought food out for a while and left it on the porch, and it went uneaten. The county came about the taxes and got no answer. Somewhere in there, the story goes, Silas died alone in that dark house, and nobody found him, and nobody looked too hard, because by then the place had gone strange in people's minds. You'd drive the county road at dusk and see the black shape of it out on the flat with not one light burning, and you'd feel the little hairs come up on your arm, and you'd drive faster. Condemned, do not enter, 22 years. That's the ranch Cole Hardy bet his last $10 on, a tomb with a mortgage. So I don't rightly know why I did it. I closed the tin box and I told the assessor I was feeling poorly, which was a lie, and I got in my truck and I drove out the county road slow, telling myself I was only going to make sure the fool didn't die of exposure 11 miles from town. That's what I told myself. The truth was closer to something I didn't have a word for, a feeling that I had just watched something begin, and that I would regret it the rest of my days if I turned my back before I saw how it came out. I keep accounts. This one wasn't finished. I caught up to him about 6 miles out. He was walking the shoulder in that same forward-falling way, and when my truck came up behind him, he stepped off into the ditch grass and turned, and something crossed his face, not fear. I'd seen fear. This was closer to weariness at the idea of one more thing to deal with. I rolled the window down. "Get in," I said, "before I feel guilty about it." He looked at me a long moment. "You're the Ledger woman." "Della," I said, "and you're a damn fool, but you're a damn fool with 11 miles to go and clouds coming in. Get in." He got in. He set the duffel between his boots and folded his hands on top of it and looked straight out the windshield, and we drove a while without talking, and I want to tell you about the quality of that quiet, because I have never sat next to anyone so quiet. It wasn't the sullen quiet of a man with nothing to say. It was full. It was the quiet of a room after a piano stops. I found myself not wanting to break it, and me, a woman who talks like a dog runs a fence line. Finally, though, I couldn't help it. "You know about that place?" I asked. "What happened out there?" "The fire," he said. "The boy, I know." "And you bought it anyway?" "I did." "Why?" He was quiet again, and I thought that was all I'd get, and then he said something that has never left me. He said, "Because a place where a boy died running into a fire for something he loved, that's not the worst place a man could end up, Miss Della. That's better than most." I didn't have an answer to that. I still don't. We came over the last low rise as the light was going amber and long, and there it was, the Bellamy place. I hadn't been up close to it in 15 years, and I'd forgotten how big it was, and how the bigness made the ruin worse. The porch sagged like a broken jaw, the wraparound rail gone in patches like missing teeth, and the glass Amos Bellamy had been so proud of was mostly gone or clouded blind, and over the whole thing lay that dust-colored silence that empty houses wear. The barn was a black scar off to the side, half-collapsed, 22 winters into its dying. I stopped the truck at the foot of the drive, and I did not want to go any farther, and I was ashamed of that and went anyway. Cole got out. He stood looking up at the house for a long time with his hat in his hand. He'd taken his hat off, I noticed, the way you do at a graveside, and the wind moved his thin hair, and he just looked. "You don't have to go in tonight," I said. "You could." "I'd like to see it," he said, "before the light's gone." And he went up the drive. And I, God help me, went with him, because I'd come this far in my own accounting and I meant to see the entry closed. The porch boards groaned under us. The front door had a hasp and a rusted county padlock, but the wood around it had rotted soft, and Cole didn't even need to break it. He put his shoulder to the door beside the lock, and it gave with a sound like a held breath letting go, the whole rotten jamb sighing loose, and the door swung inward into dark. And out of that dark came a smell. I braced for the smell of death, of rot, of 22 years of a house going back to the earth. And there was some of that. But under it, over it, threaded all through it, was another smell entirely, a smell that stopped me cold on that threshold with my hand at my throat, because it was the last thing in the world I expected out of a tomb. Wood smoke, fresh wood smoke, and under the smoke faint, unmistakable, impossible. Coffee. Somebody had made coffee in that house. That morning, somebody was making it now. Cole went very still beside me. I heard him breathe and slow through his nose, reading the dark the way he'd read that wind on the courthouse steps. And from somewhere deep in the black belly of a house that had been empty and condemned and dead for 22 years, back past the ruined parlor, back where the last of the amber light couldn't reach, a floorboard creaked under a living weight. And a voice, old and cracked and dry as the wind itself, called out into the dark. "You're late, I've had the pot on since noon." Have tried in the years since to describe the man who came out of that dark, and I have never once gotten it right. So let me just tell you what I saw and let you do the work I couldn't. He came out of the back of the house slow, one hand trailing the wall like a blind man in a place he could walk in his sleep, and the first of him I saw was the lamp. He carried an old brass hurricane lamp, turned low, and it threw his shadow up the ruined wall 3 times his height. Then his hand. Then the rest of him, edging into the amber light from the busted door, and I heard myself make a small sound because I knew him. Silas Bellamy. 22 years dead, and here he came with a lamp in his hand. Except he wasn't the Silas I'd known. That Silas had been a big man, iron in the beard, shoulders like a barn door. This one had folded down into himself the way old paper folds, gone small and dry and light, and his beard had grown out past his belt buckle, white as bone, and his eyes above it were pale and enormous in a face gone to skull. He wore a coat I recognized it. That was the thing that near put me on the floor. It was Silas Bellamy's good church coat, the one he'd worn to his wife's funeral, and it hung on him now like a coat on a nail. He'd worn one coat for 22 years. He'd worn his mourning and never taken it off. He lifted the lamp and looked at Cole, and he did not look at me at all, and he said in that cracked, dry voice, "I set 2 cups. I only ever set 2. And then, peering, his whole face working with the effort of it, "You're not, no, you're not him. I keep thinking you'll be him." "No, sir," Cole said very gently, "I'm not." And something went out of the old man, some terrible held breath, and he sagged against the doorframe, and I moved to catch him, but Cole was already there. Cole had crossed the rotten floor in 2 strides and had him by the arm, easy, the way you'd steady a fence post you didn't want to feel it was being steadied, and he got the old man to a chair. There were 2 chairs. There was a whole life in that back room I saw now as my eyes came around to the dark. One room of that condemned house kept alive like a coal banked under ash. A cot with blankets. A little iron stove with the fire in it that we'd smelled. A shelf. Cups. A coffee pot, the source of that impossible smell, keeping warm on the stove edge. And on the wall. "I'll come to the wall." The old man sat and breathed and looked up at Cole in the lamplight. And now his voice came steadier. And what he said was the strangest thing. And it took the whole night and half of Cole's life for me to understand it. "You bought the place," Silas said. It wasn't a question. I heard the truck. I always hear the trucks. Nobody comes up the drive, so when the drive gets used I know something's changed. "You bought it. That means they finally sold me off." He nodded slowly to himself. "Good. That's good. I've been waiting on somebody to buy me off this land for a long time, and I was starting to think God had lost the paperwork. Mr. Bellamy, I said, and my voice cracked. We all thought you were, the county said. Everybody said you were dead. He looked at me then for the first time, those big pale eyes swimming to find me in the dark, and he smiled. And it was a terrible smile, gentle and knowing and bottomlessly tired. I know they did, Delamero, he said. He knew my name. He'd known me the whole time, and that near broke me. I let them. It was easier for everybody. A dead man doesn't owe taxes anybody can collect, and a dead man doesn't have to answer the door, and a dead man, his voice caught and steadied, a dead man is allowed to sit in the dark with his boy and not be pitied for it. So I died. 22 years ago I stood in that yard and watched the barn burn with my son inside it, and something in me died right enough, so I just let the rest go too. It wasn't hard. Grief does most of the dying for you. You only have to agree to it. Nobody said anything. The stove ticked. Outside the wind had come up and was finding all the broken windows and playing them low, and it sounded, I swear to you, like the house itself was breathing. How had he lived? That's what you want to know. It's what I wanted to know, sitting there. And the answer came out over that long night in pieces, and the pieces were so small and so human and so unbearably practical that I had to keep my eyes on my hands. He had a garden out back, behind the house, screened from the road, worked at night and in the gray hours so no passing truck would see a moving figure and start talking. He snared rabbits. He'd kept 3 hens for a while, years back, until a coyote got them, and he still spoke of those hens with grief, as though they were more losses in a life that had run out of room for losses and kept taking them anyway. He gathered his own wood. He'd walked into Ridgeway exactly 4 times in 22 years, always after midnight, always to the back of the churchyard, and I understood without being told what was in the back of that churchyard. And I understood then why the food folks used to leave on the porch went uneaten. He wouldn't take charity any more than Cole would, wouldn't take a scrap of pity that might crack the shell he'd built. And I looked at Cole and Cole looked at me, and I saw that he'd understood it too. Understood it maybe before I had. Understood it like a man recognizing his own reflection in a dark window. That's when I first felt it, the thing between those 2 men. Something running under the words like water under ice. You want to know what I did all that time, Silas said, and he wasn't asking us, he was asking the dark. He was asking himself the way you do when you've been your own only company for 2 decades. I kept it. That's what I did. I kept his room the way it was. I kept the coffee on because he liked coffee, took it like syrup, 4 spoons of sugar, drove his mother wild. I set 2 cups every day at noon because noon was when he'd come in from the morning's work, hungry as 3 men, and I'd have it waiting and we'd sit. His voice went. He put a hand over his mouth, an old man's hand, spotted and shaking, and held it there until he could go on. I set 2 cups every day for 22 years, and I drank 1 and I let the other go cold because a father sets the table for his boy. That's the whole of it. That's the great secret of the Bellamy place that scared you all off the road at dusk. It was just an old man setting a table. And then he turned that lamp toward the wall, and he showed us what he'd made, and I have to tell you about the wall now. I've put it off long enough. He'd covered it. The whole back wall of that room, floor to ceiling, he'd covered in Tom. Photographs, the old brown kind, curled at the edges, Tom as a fat baby, Tom on a pony too big for him with his father's hand steadying the bridle, Tom grown and grinning and reckless with his hat shoved back. And where the photographs ran out, because photographs cost money and he had none, he'd drawn. Charcoal from his own stove, on whatever he had, on the backs of tax notices and feed receipts and pages torn from a Bible. A boy's face, over and over, in 100 rough hands, some of them good and some of them awful. A father teaching himself to draw at 60 years old for the sole reason that he was running out of photographs and could not run out of his son. 22 years of a man's whole heart pinned to one wall of a house he'd let the world believe was a tomb. It was the most terrible and most beautiful thing I have ever seen, and I have seen a good deal now, and I stand by it. Cole went to the wall. He went slow, the way you'd approach an altar, and he looked at it a long, long time, and I watched his shoulders, and I watched them start to shake, and I thought, I'm ashamed of the smallness of the thought, but I'll give it to you honest. I thought, this is a stranger. Why is a stranger weeping at another man's grief? And Silas watched him too. And the old man's face was doing something I couldn't read, a kind of gathering, a kind of terrible slow arrival, and he set the lamp down on the stove and he leaned forward in his chair and he said, very quietly, to Cole's back, "You keep looking at the one on the left." Cole didn't turn around. "Third row, the photograph, the one at the fence." Silas's voice had gone strange, gone high and thin and careful, a man walking out onto ice he already knows is breaking. "There's two boys in that one, my Tom and the hired boy that summer, the Hardy boy. Rode in off the road half-starved looking for work, and Tom took to him like a brother, and I fed him a whole summer and he was good help, quiet, hard-working, and he had this way of writing everything down in a little book like you." And here the old man's pale eyes swung to me, wild. "Like you, Della, always with a book, and then the fire came, and after the fire the Hardy boy was gone, run off in the night, and I never—" He stopped. He stood up out of the chair. It cost him everything. I saw it cost him everything. An old body doing a young man's thing. He crossed to Cole and he put one shaking spotted hand on Cole's shoulder and he turned him, gently, the way Cole had turned him earlier, the exact same gentleness handed back, and he looked up into Cole's weathered streaming face in the lamplight and he said, "You had a little brother that summer, didn't you? He was 9. He followed you and my Tom everywhere and you couldn't get shut of him. What was his name?" Cole's mouth moved, nothing came out, and then it did, wrecked barely a sound. "Danny." "Danny," Silas breathed. And his knees went, and this time both of us caught him, Cole and I together. We caught the old man between us and eased him down, and he was laughing and weeping at once in a way that frightened me. And he got his hands into the front of Cole's thin coat and gripped it and would not let go. And he said the thing I did not understand that night and would not understand until the sun came up, the thing that turned the whole story over like a stone and showed me the wet dark underside of it. "You came back," Silas wept. "Oh, you came back, Cole. It was never your fault. Do you hear me? Whatever you've told yourself for 22 years, whatever you spent it all crawling back here to say to a dead man, it was never your fault, and I need you to be the one it wasn't the fault of, because I've spent 22 years needing there to be a someone, and I would rather it be a living boy I can forgive than a dead one I can't." And Cole made a sound I will not try to write down. There's no letters for it. It was the sound of something that had been carried too far and too long, finally set down. I stood back from the two of them in that lamplit room full of a dead boy's face, an old ledger woman with her tally book in her apron, and no idea on God's earth how to write down what I was seeing. And I understood that I had followed something out into the dark that was so much larger than a fool and his $10, and that whatever had happened the night that barn burned, whatever a 9-year-old named Danny had to do with it, whatever a 15-year-old hired boy named Cole had done or failed to do, or spent the rest of his broken, wandering life believing he'd done, I was not going to sleep again until I knew it. Outside, the wind kept breathing through the broken house. On the stove, the coffee Silas Bellamy had made at noon for a son 22 years gone was still, faintly, warm. He'd set 2 cups. There were 3 of us now. The truth came out in the smallest hours, the way truth mostly does, not shouted, not confessed, just leaked slow from a man too worn down to hold it in any more. We'd gotten the old man onto his cot. Cole sat on the floor with his back to the wall of a dead boy's faces, and I sat in the second chair, the one Silas set each day for Tom, and I did not think about that too hard or I'd have come apart. And somewhere in the black middle of the night, with the stove ticking down and the lamp guttering, Cole Hardy told it. He'd been 15 that summer, Danny 9. Their mother had died in the spring and their father was a mean drunk who'd already half killed them both more than once. So Cole had done the only thing a 15-year-old could do. He'd taken his little brother and run, walked them both off down the county road with no plan passed away, and the Bellamy place had been the first ranch that didn't turn a hungry boy off. Silas fed them. Tom, 19 and golden and kind, took to Cole like the brother he'd never had. For one summer, Cole said this part so quiet I had to lean in. For one summer, 2 runaway boys had a father who didn't drink, and a house that didn't hit and work that made them tired in the good way. Cole said it was the only time in his whole life he'd been happy. He said it like a confession, like happiness was the crime. Then the night of the fire. Danny had a habit, Cole said, staring at nothing, sneaking out to the barn after dark. He loved the horses more than anything on this earth. There was a bay mare, Juno, about to foal, and Danny'd been sitting up with her nights, and I knew it, and I let him, because it made him happy, and God knows we'd had little enough of that. His jaw worked. I was supposed to watch him. I was always supposed to watch him. Our whole lives, I was the one that watched him. I already knew. I think I'd known since Silas said the name. But I let him say it because he needed to, because it had been locked in him for 22 years, and a thing like that has to come out the way it went in, slow and whole. It was the lantern, Cole said. Danny's lantern in the straw. He'd have hung it careless. He always hung it careless, I told him 100 times. A long breath. I woke to the light wrong through the window, wrong color. And I knew before I was even up, I knew, and I ran for that barn in my bare feet across the frozen yard, and Tom was already ahead of me. Tom had seen it first. Tom was already going through the door. He stopped a long time. Tom went in for Danny, Cole said finally. Not for the horses. Everybody's told it for 22 years that Tom Bellamy died going in for the horses, and I let them tell it. I let them because the truth was worse. Tom died going in after my little brother. He got Danny out. He carried him out through the fire and put him down in the snow and turned around and went back in for Juno, because Danny was screaming about the mare, screaming, 9 years old and burned and screaming for a horse. And Tom looked at me. He looked right at me, and he said keep him back, and he went in. And the roof came down. The stove ticked. On the cot I realized Silas was awake. Silas had been awake the whole time, lying still with his eyes open in the dark, hearing for the first time in 22 years how his son had actually died. I saw the lamplight shine wet on his cheek. He didn't make a sound. He was letting the boy finish. That old man, who'd buried himself alive over this, lay still and let the truth cut him open one more time, because he understood, the way only the truly broken understand, that Cole needed to bleed it out more than Silas needed to be spared. So it was your fault, I said. I didn't mean it cruel. I meant it the way you press on a wound to find the shape of it. That's what you've carried. You think if you'd watched Danny. I think if I'd watched Danny, Tom Bellamy would be a 51-year-old man with children, Cole said. I think Silas would have had his son and his ranch and his life. I think a good man went into a fire for my brother and never came out, and I ran. That's the part I can't. His voice failed. After the roof came down and Tom was gone and Danny was burned bad and screaming, I picked my brother up and I ran. I didn't tell Silas. I didn't stay to say what happened. I couldn't face him. I was 15 and I just watched his son die saving mine, and I ran off into the dark with Danny in my arms, and I never came back. 22 years. I let this man think his boy died for horses, because I was too much a coward to tell him his boy died for mine. Danny, I said gently, what happened to Danny? And Cole's face did a thing I hadn't seen it do. It opened, just for a second, on something that wasn't grief. Something almost worse, because it had hope tangled up in it. He lived, Cole said. He's scarred. His left side, his hand, he lived. A breath. I raised him. 15 years old, and I raised my brother on ranch work and rail work and whatever kept us fed all across 3 states, and I never let him near a horse again, and he hated me for it, and I didn't care. I'd already lost him once in that barn, and I wasn't. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. He's a grown man now, got a wife, got a little girl. Got a good life in Amarillo, an honest life, and he doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm off looking for work. He'd have stopped me if he knew. Knew what? I asked. Cole, what did you come here to do? And there it was. The reason a man bets his last $10 on a tomb. I came to buy this land, Cole said, so I could give it back. He'd spent 22 years, he told us, saving toward one thing. Not a house, not a stake, not a life of his own. He'd barely let himself have one. Every spare dollar for 2 decades had gone toward the idea that someday he'd have enough to find the Bellamy place, buy whatever was left of it out of whatever ruin it had fallen into, and put the deed in Silas Bellamy's hands, or on Silas Bellamy's grave, as the only apology big enough for what he owed. He'd finally scraped it together. He'd come to the county, and he'd found the land already seized for taxes, already going to auction, and he'd stood in that crowd with everything he had, and the price they'd called was $10, and he'd paid it, and now I don't understand what I'm holding, Cole said. He looked at the deed which he'd carried folded against his chest all this way. I came to give a dead man his home back, and he's not dead. He was here the whole time. I bought a man's home out from under him while he was still living in it. He laughed, and it was an awful laugh, and it turned into something else. I can't even apologize right. I came 2,000 miles to do one decent thing, and I got even that wrong. And that's when Silas Bellamy sat up on the cot. He sat up slow, that folded paper body, and he swung his feet to the floor, and he looked at Cole across the little room full of his son's face, and the old man was not weeping now. Something had settled in him. Something had finished. Give me the deed, Silas said. Cole rose. He crossed the room and knelt in front of the old man and put the folded paper in those spotted, shaking hands, and I watched Silas Bellamy hold, for the first time in 22 years, the deed to his own life. He looked at it a long moment, and then he did a thing that I have turned over every day since, a thing I still don't have the full bottom of. He tore it. Not in anger. Slow, deliberate, the way he did everything now. He tore the deed to the Bellamy place clean in half, and then in half again, and he let the pieces fall to the floor of that ruined house, and he took Cole's face in both his old hands the way a father takes a son's face, and he said, "The land's not the debt, boy. The land was never the debt." His pale eyes were terrible and kind. "You think you owe me a ranch. You don't owe me a ranch. My son ran into that fire because that's the kind of man I raised, and he'd do it again, and if you gave me back this whole county it wouldn't buy me one more morning with him. That debt can't be paid. Not by you, not by anybody, not ever. So put it down." His hands tightened. "But you've got a brother in Amarillo that Tom died to save. You've got a little niece Tom never got to meet. And you've spent 22 years so busy carrying a dead man's ghost you forgot the whole reason my son died was so that boy could live, and you're going to squander it. You're going to spend Danny's whole saved life crawling back to grave to apologize." The old man's voice cracked like a whip in that small room. "Tom didn't die so you could suffer, Cole Hardy. He died so a 9-year-old could grow up. You want to pay me. You want to pay Tom. Then you go live. You go be that boy's brother. You go hold that little girl. You take everything my son bought with his life, and you don't waste one more day of it in the dark." Cole broke then, all the way. 22 years of it on his knees on the floor of a dead boy's shrine, held by the father of the man who'd saved his brother. And Silas held him and rocked him a little, an old man comforting a grown one, and over Cole's shaking shoulder Silas Bellamy looked at me, the ledger woman, the keeper of accounts, sitting in his dead son's chair with my tally book in my lap and tears running off my chin, and he said, quiet just to me, "You write things down, Della, that's what you do." "Yes," I managed. "Then write this one down right." He nodded at the boy in his arms. "When they tell it in town, and they will, you're all a pack of gossips, you tell them the Bellamy place wasn't haunted. You tell them a man just loved his son too much to leave him alone in the dark. And you tell them that a cowboy came out with his last $10 to pay a debt that couldn't be paid, and an old fool wouldn't let him pay it." His mouth moved, not quite a smile. "That's a better ghost story than the one you've been telling." "That one's true." So I wrote it down. I've got it here in this book in my careful hand, every word I could hold on to. Here's what the book doesn't say, because there wasn't room. or because some things you keep off the ledger. Silas Bellamy died that winter. In his own bed in his own house, which nobody condemned again on my watch. I saw to that. I know which forms to file. He died with the wall of his son's faces beside him and Cole Hardy holding one hand, because Cole didn't go back to Amarillo alone. He brought Danny. He brought Danny's wife and the little girl too, drove the whole family 2,000 miles so a scarred grown man could sit at last with the father of the boy who died carrying him out of the fire, so the two of them could say the things there aren't letters for. Danny sat with Silas every day those last weeks. I don't know what they said. It wasn't mine to write down. The little girl, Danny's daughter, she took to Silas something fierce. Followed him everywhere, the way a 9-year-old once had, and Silas taught her to draw at the stove with charcoal in the weeks he had left, and she wasn't afraid of the burned barn or the dark house or the wall of a boy she never met. Children aren't afraid of love. Only grown people are. They buried Silas in the back of the Ridgeway churchyard next to Tom, next to the wife who went first. Cole paid for the stone. $10 wouldn't cover a stone, but he had more than $10 by then. Turned out an honest man who will pay a price in full is exactly the kind a rancher wants. And Prude of all people gave him work. And the Bellamy land runs cattle again now. Cole's cattle, Danny's some summers. I go out there still. I'm too old to be driving that county road, but I do it anyway. The house has lights in the windows now, real light, and there's a little girl's drawings pinned up next to a dead boy's, charcoal beside charcoal, and nobody drives faster past the Bellamy place at dusk anymore. Last time I went, the girl asked me why I always bring my little green book. I told her I keep accounts. She asked me what that meant, and I started to explain it the way I explain everything, back and forth like a dog on a fence line. And then I looked at that lit-up house, and that wall of faces, and the 2 cups somebody still sets out on the porch rail every noon.